Our panel tonight consists of three folks, all of whom are reasonably familiar to the Global Lens film series. First to my left here is Dr. Jimmy Reeves. Dr. Reeves is a member of the faculty here in the College of Media and Communication, teaches courses such as visual communication, analyzing television, writing for series television, introduction to electronic media, and understanding video games. His research centers on media criticism and history, with an emphasis on television analysis, and recently his research is focused to research and teaching on electronic gaming and the media playground. Recently he contributed a chapter on the subject to Media Essentials, a top-selling textbook in the area of electronic media. So welcome back, and of course Dr. Reeves is a sponsor for, along with his wife Catherine, a sponsor for the series this year. Next to him is Paul Hunton. Paul is the production director at KTTZ TV, Texas Tech Public Broadcasting. He's worked as a production assistant for 20th Century Fox on multiple major studio productions. He produces and hosts 24 Frames, a show about art, music, and entertainment and film here in Lubbock in West Texas. And he also teaches video production here in the college. And is, along with myself, a member of the Flatland Film Series programming committee. Welcome.
Thank you.
Second time I think you've been with us?
Third, I believe.
Okay.
Film, yeah.
And then finally, Dr. Gary Elbow, who has been with us many times. He's Associate Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, as well as a professor in the Department of Geography. He's interested in human geography, Latin American regional geography, and geographic education. His most recent research involves transnationalism in Latin America. He recently co-edited an online collection of papers for the National Council on Geographic Education entitled Geographic Literacy in the United States, Challenges and Opportunities in the NCLB Era. Dr. Elbow was a recipient in 2003 of the Preston E. James Eminent Latin Americanist Career Award from the Conference of Latin Americanist Geographers, and in 2009 of the George J. Miller Award for Distinguished Service from the National Council for Geographic Education. So, thank you all very much for joining us tonight. We generally proceed alphabetically with comments, so I believe that makes Dr. Elbow up first, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Okay.
Well, I'm supposed to provide the cultural interpretation on this, and that's a tough proposition. But let me start out by asking, how many of you think a film like this would have been made in the United States? Don't all raise your hands at once now. Yeah, one. Okay. Well, why? Why wouldn't a film like this be made in the U.S.?
It's too risky.
I'm sorry.
It kind of deals with subjects that are kind of taboo.
Okay, deals with subjects that are kind of taboo.
Like cooking and potting the dead body. I was just thinking the whole time, this is not right at all.
Yeah. Killing a little bird on the screen, that's not too cool. Yeah. Okay, anything else?
It's very different than what we're accustomed to, like viewing material nowadays, I would say. Like it's far fetched from what we were being used to seeing.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a hand here, right up in the middle there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Along those lines, it seems like a very personal subject, and I don't want to stereotype, but American audience don't really like to think about something about film, especially if it seems to me that this movie could be made in the United States, but it most definitely would be a cult following, and it probably wouldn't make the money that it was spent on.
Okay, it wouldn't make any money.
It wouldn't post a profit.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all the same, but I think, you know, these are all things that are hitting on it, but they're all connected. And what's the purpose of making movies in the United States for most people? And it's to make money. It's a business, isn't it? Hollywood is a business. In Latin America, it's not. Did you notice the very first thing that came up on the screen when the movie started? Before you got into the action, it was in the titles. Cine Banco. Can you guess what that might mean? Cinema Bank, exactly. Okay, what does that tell you about how films are made in Chile?
Probably that it's seen as maybe like a government enhanced sort of thing.
Yeah, well, there's a bank that supports films, right? And where do you suppose that bank gets its money?
From the government.
Uh-huh. So what you got is a world in which cinema is seen as art. You know, we have the National Endowment for the Humanities here in the United States, right? And National Endowment for the Arts. But those are broad-based. They're not focused just on cinema. I suppose, I've never heard of a film being made by NEA. I suppose they have. But that's not one of the major thrusts of those programs. But many Latin American countries actually have government agencies that fund the production of films. And so it takes it out of the commercial realm and puts it into the art realm. And when it's not commercial, then you can have a lot of fun, right? You can gamble, you can do things that you couldn't do if you were stuck with a budget and you had to have a bottom line at the end. So that's one of the things. I mean, that's not what you were expecting me to talk about, but it's one of the things that influences Latin American film and makes it so much different from American film. And by the way, it gets similar kinds of things from Europe because there are different ways of financing the production of films. And so they don't have to be big money makers. And you can be daring, and you can do things like having a scene in a morgue that you couldn't have probably in an American film. And so that's, I think, an important aspect of the whole part of producing these kinds of films. You know, they're art films. And I think that also allows you, I teach a Latin American film class, and I run a couple of old films, and then we work our way through time to the more contemporary ones through the semester. And the older films, of course, are black and white. And the students are all kind of turned off by that, you know, because we're used to Technicolor, right? And so if you were here for the film last week, you know that that film is a film about films, and that about 3/4 of the way through, all of a sudden it changes from black and white into color, and it represents the changes that took place in the film industry once Technicolor came out. And films like The Wizard of Oz were very early on in the color era, and they were miracle films. That's one of the things that made them so wonderful, the fact that they were in color. But you can still go back and do a black and white film and look at the differences between how black and white and color play out, and do it in that context of not having to make money on it. And think of it as something artistic. And of course, given the theme, maybe doing it in black and white works better. You know, if you think about how the film would have been. Otherwise, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder.
A little bit. Yeah.
What other kinds of things? Well, one of the obvious cultural elements in the film is the family. With 3 generations living in one house, right? How many of you come from, and some of you may, a household where you get 3 generations living in the same house? By the way, that's something that's happening more in the United States. But it's not the traditional pattern, is it, for us? And so that's something that's quite Latino that shows up in the film. I think the way the people interact with each other is very culture bound. and this is Chile. And one of the things that I try to tell my students when we watch these films from all over Latin America, by the way, is that we in Texas associate so strongly with Mexico because it's the neighboring country, and because a lot of people of Mexican origin live here in Texas, that we tend to think that's what Latin America is about. But every country in Latin America is different. And so what you're dealing with is an extremely varied kind of population that's held together by language and religion and a few kind of overarching things, but there's an awful lot of variation within that. And so if you knew Spanish, you might have picked up on the accents of the actors, because the southern cone, Chile, of course, is on the west coast of South America, way down on the south. It's a big, we used to call it the shoestring country, you know, that's geographers like to come up with these kinds of names. But it's very long and very narrow on the western side of the Andes. Argentina's on the other side of the Andes, and put together they make a kind of they occupy kind of a cone-shaped part of land. We call that the southern cone. And people who live in the southern cone have a very distinctive accent in Spanish. And some of that comes through in the dialogue in the film. If you don't know Spanish, it wouldn't have come through to you. But if you do know Spanish, you might have picked up on that. And you might have picked up on some differences in vocabulary. You have to be very careful when you wander around Latin America, because sometimes words that are very acceptable in one country are totally unacceptable in another, and you'd better know which ones they are and which country you're in. So those are things that, some of them subtle and some of them more obvious, that come out in terms of the culture. And I think just the way that they deal with the idea of death and being with the grandfather when he dies is something that's also quite Latino. The idea of ghosts. Ghosts are kind of important in the film, both fake ghosts in terms of Alvaro and the company, but also real ghosts. What happens when the grandfather dies? His spirit leaves his body and walks out of the room. And who's the woman? The old woman who's filling out the puzzles for him.
Personification of death.
I'm sorry.
It's a personification of death.
I'm not sure she personifies death, but she's clearly not a real person.
Perhaps it was grandmother.
It might be. We don't know. No, that's left to your imagination. But that idea that there's a life beyond, that there are things we can't explain, is very strong in the culture. So I guess I'll stop at that point.
So you mean to go ahead? Yeah, one thing that really stuck out to me, and let's go back to the very start of the film, that opening scene, it's very interesting because it starts out a movie about something, and then it becomes, after the credit sequence, a movie about something entirely different. It reminded me of David Lynch's Blue Velvet, in the sense that you're given this world, this kind of family-oriented, we're at this track meet, and this little girl's got this crush on this guy, and it's very, it's very on the nose, it's very, I wouldn't say Disney Channel, but it's that whole, teenage, it's got that whole feel to it, that it's going to be a movie about this girl and this family, and oh man, it's just dysfunctional, and she just doesn't fit in, and it has this real standard feel to it. And then she drops dead, and when we come back, the movie's about something entirely different. If you're not familiar with David Lynch's Blue Velvet, it starts with the song Blue Velvet, and it's a suburbia, and it's this beautiful neighborhood, and the man's watering his yard, and he drops dead, and the camera sinks down below the grass, and you see the worms and the festering of all these evil, nasty-looking things. And that gives you a glimpse of what the film is going to be about. And while David Lynch is David Lynch, and this makes no attempt to try to be David Lynch, it's that same kind of idea of kind of fooling the audience to show them something different. And I thought this film had a lot more hope than David Lynch film has, but the way this film started, it was very interesting, and it was very neat to see that style shift and that whole drag you in here, but then take you a different place. And so that was something that was really fascinating to me, and I thought it really played well, and I thought they did it in a very good way. And that speaks well for the whole film. Sometimes style is tied too much, or not tied enough to the theme, not tied enough to how the film is made. And some people do things for the sake of style. And if you think about this film and you think about some of the stylistic things they did, like the film that they're making it was in color, while the actual real world as we would have known it is in black and white. And you can look at that a few different ways. I think it was neat to see that, one, because it kind of flipped how you think of filmmaking in general, how you think of how you would see these different worlds, to where the fake world was in color, which is how we see the world, and the actual real world was in black and white. You can look at that a couple different ways. Life and death, since that's essentially what this film is about, is life and death. You could look at it as maybe the characters in a reflection of how he sees life, which was very black and white, very life and death. And so those things that were very stylistic were actually tied to something in the film other than just style for the sake of style. And I really liked how they did that. Thematically, it was really great to see, and like Dr. Elbow talked about, it obviously Latin American countries see death in a very different way. And some of this was, whenever they killed the bird, I was, I can't handle stuff like that. And even looking at the grandpa in the eyes as he dies, makes me like kind of move in my seat. But that's because just how I think of death and how we relate to death here. And if you think about the different characters and how Gaspar, the main character, he starts out seeing death as an end. In the beginning of the film, you kind of get the idea his brother has died, his beloved brother, someone he was very near and dear to, has died, and he sees it as the end, and it's this really deep thing in his life that's really causing him a lot of pain. And then his sister, she sees death as a burden. She's carrying this burden on her shoulders of her grandpa and then his impending death. She's carrying the burden of the mom and her impending death. She's carrying the burden of the brother that passed away, who she tries to communicate with through the Ouija board. And so death is a real burden to her. And then you have Alvaro, who sees death as a transformation, as just a vehicle to another form of being. And the whole film is about Alvaro. And you have to, there was a lot of different things in this film. And, like we talked about could be the grandma. I kind of thought it was death personified, or an angel of death. It kind of felt that way to me. She's in all black. She's, but I mean, it's up to you, the interpreter, to decide what you feel that is. But I kind of, like you, I agree. I think that was kind of the personification of death, or an angel of death, kind of guiding him to that other world. And Alvaro kind of plays that role too. For Gaspar, he disappears. We never see his body. And what did he say in the film? He said, whenever I kill myself, no one's going to find me, and you won't know if I live or I die. Pretty awesome, because that's how it ends. That's how his end actually comes at the end of the film. And so you're actually left to wonder, He's a drifter. He kind of drifts in and then drifts out. And you almost wonder if he was, an angel or a being from another realm, because you can't find the body. And I thought that was interesting that he called that in the beginning, and that's how it ended. And then we end with, Gaspar on the beach kind of contemplating those same ideas. And he's really transformed. And his arc is the one that we kind of have throughout the film. And we see him transform into a more open person, kind of seeing death in a different light at the end there. But all those things were great. And just from a technical aspect, I think everything was pretty much handheld. Mm-hmm. I don't think there was really any, fancy dolly shots or cranes or any of that stuff. I don't even know if there was a tripod. It was all pretty much handheld, except the film that they were making, which was awesome. And so you have this very kind of zooming through life, this very kind of first-person experience, even though it wasn't shot first-person, just that camera movement and all that kind of thing. It makes you feel like you're there with them. And so all those things I thought were tied together, and they played very well off of each other, which leads to a good film experience and to an overall very, very good film. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, there was an economy of editing in that. I don't know if you noticed it, but the one scene where she's at the very beginning, where she's on the phone talking, and they're in the back, and there's the cameraman in the background, and there's one take. I mean, it's basically one take, that whole scene. And I was kind of watching to see if there would be a lot of long takes like that, and then stop paying attention. But I did notice that that they hold the takes quite a while, and that there's very little in the way of editing, so it really draws attention to that one really quick sleeping montage where they're going, where you get all these shots of different people asleep and the actress awake, and which was an interesting play with technique. I was going to talk about, you guys have stolen everything. I was going to talk about the use of black and white and color and the choice. Now, I mean, back in when we talk about Hollywood films of the 30s and 40s, Technicolor was available, but for economic reasons, people shot in most studio films were released in black and white, so that and with the coming of television sort of forced Hollywood to move from being predominantly black and white being the norm to color being the norm. At the beginning of the 1950s, I think it was a 70-30 mix. It was 70% black and white movies and 30% color. And then at the end of the 50s, this is when you have this tremendous rise in the number of televisions. You see that it's 70% color and 30% black and white. And basically, you can probably figure out why. This was prior to the advent of color television. This is when Hollywood's doing anything it can bring viewers back to the movies. And so one way is to say it's in living color. You can see this. You can see this. You have to come to the movies to see color. You can't get that on your home screen. Well, after that, then whenever you see a black and white film, at least an American film, it's black and white for a reason. I mean, they're trying to make some sort of artistic statement. I mean, it's meaningful that it's black and white. Memento. How many of you have seen Memento? Black and white film. Clearly a very different kind of film, black and white. And recently, I think it's really interesting what's going on with one of my favorite television series called The Walking Dead, and that is that they're starting over with season 1 in black and white, and it's a different. Have any of you watched the black and white episodes of Walking Dead? Very different show. It's a very different experience. Actually, it's better, I think, in black and white than in color. It sort of fits what that's all about.
Fits the comics.
Yeah,
too. The comics black and white.
All right, there you go.
The source material.
Right, the source material is black and white. Raging Bull was black and white. So generally, what happens now is when you see a film in black and white, that there's a choice. What are they trying to say with this? And I think that you're right. They sort of flip it with this sort of heightened fake reality of the movie, of the the cheesy movie is in black and white, and it has the same kind of fake emotions, right? And everything about it is contrived, and so that the movies that the choice of making IRL in real life, which of course both of them are, both the movie that's in black and white and the movie that's in color are just contrivances, right? They're shot. There's filmmakers there, but it's meant to say this is more real, even though it's actually not more real. What you saw with in the black and white in real life material here that's presented as sort of documentary style of what's going on, handheld camera and all that, is just as fictitious, right? as the stupid horror movie. The actors are acting. The actors are acting. And what makes it different is it calls attention to the actors acting in the cheesy movie versus the actors acting in the other part of the film have a different sort of French style, I guess. They appear to be doing everyday life. So I think that there's some it's worth thinking about. The Wizard of Oz, of course, is at least the first one I can think of that sort of plays with transition. Kansas, of course, should be black and white, and then they go to Oz, and they still maintain that in this most recent the
Great and Powerful
Great
Oz.
and Powerful Oz, right? They start out is it in Kansas too? I'm not sure. Okay, it's in Kansas too, black and white. Really interesting effects in the black and white, and then Oz is in color. And then the movie that you mentioned last week also is very expressive in terms of showing what's going on with black and white and color. The film that it's worth, I think, mentioning that last year the film that won the Academy Award was a movie called the French film called The Artist, right? And it doesn't do the black and white thing, but it has the same kind of interesting moment when they go from silent to sound. Do you remember that? Yeah. Right? And I mean, it's very much a choice. It's very striking the way they do it, very inventive the way they do it. I think that the movie last week, when they went from black and white to color, used the same kind of interesting transition, sort of a way of going in there. The last thing I want to talk about, I think, is the climax to this film. What is the climax to this film?
Swimming out into the ocean.
What's that?
Swimming out into the ocean.
Not swimming out into the ocean, but that's starting the climax. What's the climax?
The choice to either swim back in.
That choice to swim back in. All right? That reminds me kind of, how many of you, the Last Picture Show, another black and white film. Anybody in here seen the Last Picture Show? I'd recommend it to you. Peter Bogdanovich directed it.
Great film.
It's a great film about Texas. It's one of the great Texas films. That and Giant and Blood Simple I would put in the top 3 Texas films. But and Blood Simple's black and white too, come to think of it. But
is it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure. Is Blood Simple black and white?
I think it's color.
It feels black and white.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
It feels like. But there is a scene, and it really struck me hard because I'm from a small Texas town. I'm from Abernathy, just 17 miles north of here. And there's a scene where one of the characters gets in he's going to leave this town. He gets in his truck, his pickup truck. He starts barreling out of the town, and he goes past the city limits, and he just starts slowing down, and finally he turns back and goes back into the town, right? This guy, now, so we've got, cut back to this film, we've got the final scene with the climax is when he turns around and swims back. Now, what has this character been trying to do all through the movie? Been trying to kill himself. So what does that mean? What's the meaning of that turning around and coming back to shore?
That he's fixed, like his wanting to kill himself got fixed because of how it works.
Here's his opportunity. He's a golden opportunity to kill himself.
Been helping him throughout the whole movie, and he's the one that's going out and dying. He's the one that's turning around.
Yeah.
To save himself.
If he was actually not, I see him sort of as as this sort of manifestation of his brother.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, like the manifestation of death as the dead grandmother.
Yes.
Right. So that, but other people can see him.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a difference there. But in some ways, I see him as this sort of angel of death that's coming to give Gaspard his chance to go on to the next realm, and he comes back to life. He chooses to swim back to shore. He chooses life. Right? I think, and yet still that wasn't the final scene. What's the final image of that scene?
And looking out into the ocean.
Gaspard gazing out there. He's deep in thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is another thing that you have to realize is the distinction between commercial cinema and those films that aspire to be art, and that is the commercial cinema promises a pleasure trip, right? It promises to give you a great deal of action and fun and excitement, but to relieve all the tensions, right? To answer all the questions, to what they call resolve all the answers at the end. So you leave those films behind you, right? You don't carry them with you because, I mean, you may remember them or whatever, but you're not. But there's this sense of closure. It's closed off. You leave it behind. This is more of a film that I think most of you agree is more alienating in the sense that it's not exactly a pleasurable film. You know, it's not in the sense of a Hollywood film, because they want you to think about it. They want you to be like that figure at the end of the movie staring out at the ocean instead of leaving the film behind to contemplate. This is not the film of pleasure. This is the film of contemplation, right? This is the cinema of contemplation. And I think that the global lens is that almost uniformly in terms of the movies that we see in the global lens, that there is at the end plenty left to think about, right? Plenty left to think about. And that's a distinction. I think it's what makes this such a rich cultural experience. And though you may not say this is the best movie I've ever seen or anything like that, I do hope that you will continue to come and experience these movies to see, to sort of explore deep thinking at the global level, right? And deep thinking about, I mean, life and death here. The meaning, basically, this is the meaning of life. Is death the meaning of life? Is love the meaning of life? Is life over after death? Is love over after death? You know, there's all these things going on. I think with this film, and it sounds like a cliche to ask those big questions, but those are the big questions.
Yeah,
you know,
without a doubt.
those are the huge questions.
Yeah, and like you're saying, you know, it is a great opportunity to see films from these different cultures because, you know, culture leads to style or leads to theme, but yet one thing we all have in common is the human experience, right? And so while these films are made by a different culture and may lead to a different style or theme than what we're used to, the one thing we can all relate to is each other's human experience. And so there's definitely things that I feel like you probably all related to in this film, whether you loved the film, whether you didn't like it at all. There are certain things you can pick out of this film that you can relate to, whether it's your questions about life and death. And so I think that the Global Lens series is so important, especially for people who are in college, because to experience those things and to understand how it is a global thing and the human experience is more than just us in a country or a university, that it's bigger than all of that, and it is an entire globe. It really opens your eyes to understanding these different cultures and really helps to, I think, help people grow as human beings. So you should count yourself lucky. You know, I know I was in college once and sat through a lot of films that I thought were boring that later on in life I thought, man, those were spectacular things to experience. So even if you're here as a requirement or if you're here because you love it, you should really take something away from it, because it is a unique experience to be able to enjoy these, and this was a really good film. I think there's no doubt about that.
I think that you're used to a certain type of suspension of disbelief, right? I mean, if you go to see the wonderful Oz, right? The Great and Wonderful, Oz the Great and Wonderful, right? You go in there and you say, you know it's a movie, you know that there's no such place as Oz or whatever, but to really enjoy that film, what do you have to do? You have to suspend disbelief and just sort of accept what's going on there. When you come to these films, I promise you, if you have a sort of open-mindedness to sort of not judge these films based upon films that have an entirely different motive, right? Entirely different reason for being, but to look at them on their own, for their own value and what the artist is trying to say, That's a form of suspension of disbelief that I think you would find would make this incredibly enriching experience. But it takes setting aside the sort of normal judgments about what a movie should be for this 90 minutes and saying, well, this is not what I would see in the American cinema, but it's going to show me a different way of telling a film story, and it's going to stretch me in certain ways. It's going to ask me to think in ways that Hollywood films don't typically do.
They tend to be very slow moving. This one is typical, and very slow plot development. But
Very character oriented, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's two types of art. This is what I tell my students in my video production class. There's two types of art. There's art that nourishes, and then there's art that's there for entertainment value, or art that's there to stimulate for the split second that's in front of you. And a lot of these global films, and this one particularly, and what you were hitting on, is this is really art that nourishes. It's art that you take with you. It's art that you think about. And so I don't know how many of you are EMAC majors or have any, intention to go into storytelling. But if you do, you should really concentrate and see that difference between art that nourishes and that art that is just there to entertain. Because art that nourishes is art that lasts. Filmmaking that nourishes are the films that we talk about for 100 years. And I'm not saying this is one of those films, but this film reaches for that same thing. And so I think there's a lot to take away from this.
I wonder if you could say that the nearest thing to it in the United States is documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of independent cinema right now in America that I think can go up. We talked about at the beginning, would this get made in America? And I think the answer is yes, especially now that we're seeing these lines blur. On a commercial level, on a studio level, no. 20th Century Fox isn't going to make this film. But because of how democratized equipment has become, how democratized the ability to find an audience has become, we may not see a lot of this yet, and it may not be flooding our cinemas, but I think we're going to. I think that the level at which the studios have been able to keep other people out is slowly coming down, and the room for great art is rising steadily. And so while you might not be able to go and rent this out of a red box, I think in American society we're hungry for it, and I think we're headed that way. And I think because of how audiences are reached these days, I mean, it's a powerful thing. And especially folks that are your age, you really got to think about how powerful it is. You take YouTube for granted because there's a lot of cat videos on it. But man, 20 years ago, 25 years...
A lot of great cat videos.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, love the cat videos. 25 years ago, if you guys wanted to make a film, or someone like this wanted to make a film in America, the cost to do it, to buy the film stock, to hire the crew, to get people who know and understand how to manipulate film and light film and shoot film, the ability to hire the actors, the equipment's heavy, to get all that stuff to be able to do it, the cost is, you couldn't afford it. And now here we are in 2013, and the ability to buy and have the highest quality of video that almost everyone else is shooting with on major levels. You can get a GoPro for $200, right? And that's shooting at the same quality as about 90% of the rest of the professional world. And yet you have that ability at your fingertips for $200. And then not only that, but then you say 25 years ago you were like, I'm going to do it, I'm going to invest all this money and make my film. Who would you show it to? You could do the film festival thing and have limited audiences, and maybe you'd get a bite and be able to make a bigger film, but you really wouldn't have an audience. Now you have the potential for $200 to shoot this stuff and to put it on YouTube, which has the potential to reach billions of people. That's powerful. That is very powerful. And we're in the infancy stage of people harnessing the power of that. You think of viral videos and, I don't want that, but there's a lot of people who are creating content out there, and you have to sift through a lot of the crap that's out there, but there's people out there who are creating content that's worthy, that's nourishing. And I think it's important to realize the power of these mediums that are coming to be, because you know, we take a lot of it for granted, but we're in the infancy stage. You think about fine art, painting, and those kinds of things, music. They've been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Filmmaking, video production, 100 years old, 115 years old. We are in the infancy stage of the power of this medium. And I just encourage you to not take it for granted, but to realize and harness those things and really use them to your benefit. Get off my soapbox, sorry.
Well, I think Dr. Peasley could speak to that. To your question, Dr. Elbow, I think that there's that the festival circuit is where you see movies made like this.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's been some, like, is it what's the train one? Night Train or Mystery Train?
Jim Jarmusch?
Yeah, Jim Jarmusch.
Yeah.
He's made movies like
Yes,
this.
without a doubt.
Yeah,
If you think about his first film, it was in black and white,
Yeah.
Stranger Than Paradise.
Yeah.
Very similar to this.
mean, you
and
see-
it does deal with some of the same themes.
You see it, but it's not, you know, it's by necessity. I guess it's just not going to be a
Sure.
blockbuster movie.
Yeah,
but,
without a doubt.
But it's going to be the kind of movies that serious people who enjoy the art of nourishment, I like that idea, will attend to. And what I'm hoping that, and I think this is what Dr. Peasley and I, our agenda is in electronic media, is to recruit you into this cult, right? To recruit you into the group of people that enjoy cinema in all its various richness, rather than just one narrow cut of it that's made for you know, money and entertainment reach. And it's also interesting, I think, to see how this sort of distinction plays out. I didn't even realize it. In video games, there's indie video games that are very different, have a very different artistic sensibility. Robin Hazlett talked to our video game class about it. We looked at I would encourage you, if you haven't seen it, it's called Indie Film the Movie. And you see that these people are serious about their video design, as serious as these filmmakers are. And think about the distinction in movies. In music, between the indie music that you hear down in South by Southwest versus the highly slickly produced, commercial stuff that you hear on top 40 stations, right? Clearly, there's a way to sort of experience the world where you don't say, well, that's all commercial crap, I'm not going to pay attention to it, but that you embrace the whole realm of it, right? And not just get locked into this. If it's not like this, it's not worth me watching. It's not worth my time. Now, the good thing about this global lens thing is it's free, right? How many of you had to pay to get in? None of you. Cheap date. Come back. Even if you've used up your two viewings in my classes, nothing says you don't have to come back for a third viewing.
That's
right. Right. All these films are worthy of at least watching and thinking about. They may not be the best movies in the world, but some of them are.
Yeah.
Any questions? A lot of soapboxing up here.
I had a question. I'm a bit of a cinephile, and I thought there was a pretty obvious homage to Bergman's Seventh Seal.
Might be.
As far as
Yeah,
as a kid,
sure, yeah,
speeches,
definitely.
whiteface paint.
Definitely,
This
yeah.
movie had at Seventh Seal, there's a troupe of amateur theater actors
Mhm.
who were making what they believed to be, passionately making what they believed to be art, which is really just crude amusement purpose.
Yeah.
And I kind of read the film as a new director trying to kind of take on.
It would be wonderful to find out if he's been influenced by
Yeah,
it.
you know
Remaking it with
in a different culture and society, and that's great. That's fantastic. I didn't think about that, but definitely you see that, and you think about the film crew in this film, and how they're, you said French or whatever, that has that style of comic relief. That you see in French films, and Francois Truffaut is one that has that too, to where you have these very serious characters dealing with these very serious things in life, and then there's always these comic relief. And Ingmar Bergman did that too with that troupe and in that film. And so yeah, that's great. That's a good analogy for it as well.
So I thought very much like the way that they play chess through the man's life. He was interacting with death to
Yeah.
ultimately make his own decision whether he wanted to.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yes.
I want to say that's interesting that you saw it from director's view, because I watched it from like a filmmaker's view too, and I thought the movie was about creation instead, because the only characters that are happy are the terrible actress slash director slash editor, whatever she was doing, and the only thing in color that looks good, even if it's grainy, is the bad movie.
Yeah.
Even when she goes down on the ground, has to adjust her hair.
That was the greatest scene in there, I thought.
Yeah,
When she-
I'm not. I would challenge you to think about this. I'm not so sure she was happy. I mean, she stayed up
It seemed
late.
like she was just at least too high on herself.
Well, I feel-
because she noticed.
Sure,
it and just
definitely.
thought, oh no, that doesn't even bother
To
me.
me-
I'm making a mortal life
Yeah.
out of your creation.
To me, it was artificial. To me, her outlook on life was a false poem, a false poetic, just the way she saw life, and that's part of the reason why it was in color. She wants everyone's acceptance. She wants everyone to like her. She talks about Alvaro. Do you think he has short legs? She's making that poor woman stay up on the phone with her to talk about these ridiculous things that are all self-serving to her. And so, I mean, I didn't get that she was a happy character, other than maybe artificially. But that is, I mean, that's an interesting take on it for sure.
What'd you think of the title sequence? This pretty
All the
good.
animals.
I'm not sure it fit the movie, but
Yeah, I'm with you on
but it was
that.
a great,
I'm
it was
with
a
you.
great title
yeah.
sequence by itself. Yeah,
Yeah. Other than the bird that dies.
yeah.
And the fish. And that was one thing too, those fish were obviously CGI or computer generated, and they were it was a little too much. But that the film really does kind of shift, and it was kind of very, very standard, very slow, very dry. And when Alvaro comes into the picture, it shifts into kind of, you have this hyper-realism, you have his dream sequence where he falls through the bed and the grass on the floor and all that kind of stuff, and so that scene in the pet store when the fish are obviously not, I mean, I think they were supposed to be real in the movie, but you could tell they were kind of crude animations, that kind of thing. You really do feel when Alvaro enters the picture that the film does kind of shift its tone a little bit, and there's more room for that surrealism and that hyper-realism that you see throughout the film.
There was one scene I just have to mention that I thought was brilliant, and that's when they're at the dead cat. They hear the car out there, and they're by the dead cat. And I think it's one take. I don't think they cut.
The shift
they,
over,
They
yeah.
just cut across the pavement, and you see this
as a-
flashback to his childhood, and they play it out. And he says the words that later on cue.
Alvaro says about the bird.
Yeah,
right?
about the bird, and then it just pans back, and they're still it pans back to the present time, and that's an example, I think, of really inventive filmmaking that you're not necessarily going to see except in a film like this, where they're really playing around with technique.
Those were really long shots throughout the film.
Yeah.
They
Yes.
were 12 seconds, 20 long.
Well, that's what you were saying. That
Yeah.
first shot is all one take.
Yeah.
And then it really is second shift act when all those people are asleep, just.
Yeah. That was that was really interesting.
Yeah, it was good.
There was a question up
You were saying that did you say that the opening scene didn't really have anything attached to the movie itself?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The title sequence?
Sorry. Yeah. The opening scene. What I said was it set it up to be a different film, but then took us somewhere else. And no, I think it had a lot to do with the rest of the film. I think it really anchors the film and ties it all together. And really, that opening scene could really be a reflection of what follows after it. What I was saying is he sets it up stylistically to be something else, and then he pulls, just like the beginning of Blue Velvet, it's set up to be something, and then it becomes something entirely different, but it's because of that scene that sets it up that makes it what it is. So no, it was tied to the film very, most definitely.
What'd you think about the happy birthday?
That was funny. He was a funny character, yeah.
Anybody else? I can see my students are antsy to get their little ticket so they can go home.
Well, I thought it was interesting that when you've mentioned the scene where they're cutting through everyone sleeping and she's the only one awake. And I thought that, like Lawrence's point, that was kind of commentary on she was the only one, even if she wasn't very happy, but she's the only one trying. She was the only one awake, and everyone else was kind of sleeping through the rest, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah. It is. I mean, that's the great thing about film is everyone sees it in a different way and takes something from it, and that's what makes good art great.
And there's not always a right answer.
No.
Often characters are composed to be multivalent.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Well, I think our is it Arturo?
Alvaro.
I think Alvaro is just open to all kinds of interpretations.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he's either is his brother come back? He's just
He's a ghost. He's an angel. He's a real person.
And none of them are right. None of them are wrong.
Exactly.
I do love that this film doesn't really have a sense of catharsis at the end. Like, there's no real satisfaction to me. It's just looking out to the ground. But the way I saw it was he was back to square one because he kind of lost his brother again, thinking that
Sure. Yeah.
his brother was all
Definitely.
alone.
Yep.
And so it's just a vicious cycle of, and he's, all this death happened in one day, and then he's back to, well, I guess I'll kill myself in the worst ways possible. The safety razor, and
Yeah.
the pilot light, he's going to, like, suffocate himself with that. It didn't really seem like he was trying to kill himself. I mean, he made a little effort.
Yeah.
All right, well, should we